Thought you were looking at a painting, didn't you? Actually, it's just me, Professor Troy Lambert, and congratulations, you have made it to the end of Art 385. Welcome to week number 8, and a brief discussion on this week's film, and a few short assignments. Turn in your term paper, and you, my friends, will be done with this class. And hopefully either some of you are graduating, some of you are going to enjoy summer, and then some of you will probably start another class the very next week. But anyways, nonetheless, it's been a pleasure serving you, working with you, and hopefully all of us learning a few new things about film that we didn't know before. This week's film is Therese, however you want to say it, a French film made in 1986 by Alan. It looks like Cavalier, but Cavalier probably would be the more proper French pronunciation of the film. It actually won the jury award at the Cannes Film Festival in 1986, and it is 94 minutes in length, so it's one of the shorter ones that we've had this semester, which should be nice for all of us. The filmmaker, Alain Cavalier, is still making movies to this day. In fact, his film Pater, Pater, just screened at the Cannes Film Festival back in May. So he's a contemporary filmmaker. That film that he just recently screened was still somewhat, I don't want to necessarily say experimental in nature, but his films often play as if they're a theater production. They shot it in high definition. They said it felt very different, and I think you'll find that this movie feels different compared to the others that we have seen. In some ways, it has elements of Andrei Rublev to it, in the sense that it's dealing with someone who's passionate about spiritual themes. But the good news is it's not over 3 hours long, as that movie was. And in some ways, it has some similarities to The Marquise of O, in the sense that it has no soundtrack. Now, I hesitated to point that out because it's actually kind of fun to realize as you're watching a movie, whether it's a quarter into it, halfway through it, hey, there's no music in this movie. But nonetheless, I did want to point out that as a unique aspect. But I think really how this movie is unique is the art of the genre of art that it is emulating, which is still life. And for those of you at home who aren't quite sure what still life is, I put up 3 examples up in the learning activities of some still life paintings. It is a genre that really began to emerge as its own genre in the Renaissance. There are some paintings that you can see previously that would look like still life art, even back to the Roman era. Nonetheless, it became its own from the Renaissance on. It could be described like this. I got this, I think, from the Encyclopedia Britannica, looking for a good definition here, but a still life is a picture of objects that don't move, typically. Though you'll see there with a woman with a parrot, obviously a woman and a parrot do move, but the style that it's done in is definitely influenced by the still life genre. Often what you would find are vases, bowls of fruit, bottles. The Dutch painters really picked up on some of the life issues, and so they would be skulls, candles, hourglasses, all kind of representing mortality of man, yet mixed with flowers and fruit, showing kind of the cycles of life. And so some of these still life paintings you can look at and go, okay, I don't see anything deeper than some bread and cheese. But typically there are often, I should say, some allegory involved there. Often you'll find bread and bottles of wine, which often represents communion and the body of Christ in that sort of way. And as I said, some of the Dutch, particularly early Dutch Renaissance painters picked up on this issue of mortality, and so you'd find skulls in them. Interesting to note, the Szechuan painting that I put up there is definitely an impressionistic styled painting, yet it still has a skull and fruit and kind of the life cycle issue going on there, yet in an impressionistic sort of style. You also see an early Dutch I would say, actually not early. I think it's a 18th century, 1780s. Don't remember the date off to quite my head that I put up there for you. But it has a lobster and I believe a pitcher and some other food and so forth. A painting up there. One thing that you'll notice with these is not so much, definitely the objects that are involved, but also the use of lighting. I tried to emulate a little bit of it here, some maybe natural soft lighting, and along with that, the absence of depth of field. There's no real depth of field in these paintings. It's a very much almost a portrait style, what we would consider, you go down and get your picture at the local mall, they pull down the canvas behind you, and there you go, there's your photo. We're used to that style, and these paintings were very much the same way. It wasn't about what was going on in the world, it's about what's happening with these objects that are right before you. And so in that way, Cavalier picks up on this still life art. We're going to notice that much of the action takes place right in front of us, and it takes place in close-ups. And that's something that Therese talks about, that these close-ups are very powerful because they draw our attention, they draw our gaze to the subjects. And they might be just two human beings talking with each other, but they're very close, and it's very intimate in that sort of way. It draws us in closer than typically, if you will, as I said a few weeks ago, the kind of Hollywood film way. I like what Therese said on page 235 as she talks about still life and the close-up. She says, Cavalier's simple images acquire the richness of painting because the absence of complex action allows the spectator's vision to linger over their surfaces. And so the absence of a background, the absence of action, the absence of what we're used to seeing in a film, it actually attracts us. It catches our attention. It causes us to linger and to stare and to gaze and to discern what is going on here with these characters, what's going on with this story. Though the film is very different in style, for me, I would say that this comes the closest to emulating the genre of art that it is trying to emulate of the several films that we've seen before. I know Red Desert was hard to watch, but the more I think about it, that was a visually inspiring film. You can definitely see the director's intentional use of the visual space and colors and being influenced by abstract art. So I would say that's probably my second favorite film in regards to just the visual content of what we saw this semester. And that's just me personally. Some of you might like others. But when I think about Therese, the more I watch it, the more I observe it, I realize this movie really is directly influenced by the still life art style. I mean, it is very minimalistic. The props, the setting, the costume, even the acting, the lighting, the arrangement, the mise-en-scene as I'm trying to build towards. Ooh, how do you like that lens flare coming through there? Let me adjust it for you a little bit. Ooh, it's kind of like a John or a J.J. Abrams movie. He loves using lens flares. Let me see if we can adjust that here a little bit. So I'll talk and I'll go close the blind here real quick behind me here. Anyways, so these close-ups that he uses along with the style, it shows us intimacy. There we go. It creates intimacy with Therese's sisters, her father, the convent, and maybe even to a certain degree, Cavalier is trying to say an intimacy with God in that regards. And so we feel very close to that as we watch the movie. And as I said, as you look at some of these still life paintings, you notice that in some ways it's arranged in a very similar sort of way. As I said there, the mise-en-scene that we talked about, I just want to make sure I've touched on everything. Depth of field is limited. Everything takes place very close up. The sets and props are minimal. The action is side to side, which is very interesting to me. Very much there isn't anybody walking from the background to the foreground or vice versa. It's side to side in that regard. It doesn't need much space. And as I said, the lighting is very simple. It's very much like a portrait. And another unique aspect is that the camera angles rarely call attention to themselves. though the close-up might scream, "Hey, look, I'm in your face. I'm very close." You're not dealing with a very flamboyant auteur who's putting high angles and low angles and sweeping camera movements or tracking camera shots or anything in that regard with action in it. It's a very, very staged, very subtle, well-directed film visually. So the film indulges in the simplistic and the commonplace. And much like still life paintings, it even though they are simplistic, it is filled with allegory and deep contextual meaning. I like what Roger Ebert said. I've quoted him a couple times, and I think I do because he's one of the more mainstream critics. I mean, yeah, you can go read his review on Hangover 2 or on Transformers. He watches all sorts of movies, but I think in some ways he's kind of easier for us as lay folks to understand. He said this towards the end of his review: "This movie is so deep and so subtle that we cannot ever be sure just what the filmmaker thinks about Therese." And that's one of the reasons I found it so disturbing and provoking. What Cavalier gives us is a portrait of the externals of sainthood, and just those internals that can be glimpsed and guessed through the eyes of a gifted actress. He makes no statement about his material. And I'm not going to dive into what this movie means. I think Del Vecchie, she attempts to do that. You can go and read other sources that will attempt to do that. But for me, this is film as visual art. And what you're going to watch as a film is a visually eye-catching film. And all of us will probably have a different interpretation of what exactly Cavalier was trying to say with the film. One unique aspect, though, is that it is of Therese, late 19th century, early 20th century nun, French nun, who was in the order, I believe, in Carmel, was a Carmelite. And eventually was canonized, I believe that's the term, as a saint by the Roman Catholic Church. This sainthood, often you need some sort of miracle to prove that they're worthy of being a saint. I think typically you need 3 miracles in that regard. My 3-year-old son, Jackson, is walking in here. Hi, son. Can you give me a moment? Thank you. All right, he's excited because we're making ice cream. But anyways, before I lose my train of thought, okay, so we're watching her go from being a young girl through her life as a nun all the way up to her death. Yet we never really see the moment where perhaps she performs a miracle. And some have speculated that that is intentional because we want to see her as a person and see the grace and the humility that she exudes as a person throughout the various vignettes and moments in the movie, or in her life that we see in the movie. And then others are disturbed by the fact that we don't see this. Maybe there is some sort of subtle suggestion that she was just a mere human, and just that alone is worth us looking at her and her life, not necessarily seeing some sort of supernatural miracle in that regard. That's left for you to decide. I do believe movies are about telling stories, and yet what we're looking at today is really the visual aspects of this storytelling. And I hope you find the movie unique. I hope you do enjoy it. So that kind of concludes my setup. I tried to keep it short and brief. Thank you so much for working with me this semester. I've taught this class many times, as I said at the beginning, and yet my approach was different. This has now been standardized by the school, and so in that regard, I was kind of learning all that they wanted to include on it or in the class. One moment, please. Please take your Hot Wheels and go in the other room. Thank you. I heard something go through a loop-de-loop there. Sorry, so unprofessional. But anyways, I do encourage you to make sure that you're on top of all your work. I am obviously going to be on top of getting all the grading done. A couple of you have emailed me that you haven't seen anything graded from week 5 or 6. Yes, I'm working on it. Some of you have it done and others don't. I apologize for that. But I am working on it. If you have turned something in late, or if you have fixed a discussion, there's some of you who just didn't write a long enough discussion piece, and I said it needs to be longer. If you've gone back and changed that, remind me via email so I can go back and change those. I don't think Blackboard lets me know that correction has been made in that regards. And if there is something that you've just totally skipped, week 2, you forgot to write anything, and you're a loss for it, email me. I like to be more gracious than not, and so I might allow you to make up a few points. I will not give you full credit or even probably near half credit. It's that late, but I'd be willing to work with you in that regards. And also the term paper, keep in mind that it is due Thursday night, the night of the 30th, the end of June. It is due. I made a mistake and put up a few days ago that it was the Wednesday night, but it's Thursday night by 11:59 p.m. The term paper's due. Part of this is so I can get grading on those before my grades are due, and then all of your work is due on Saturday night, not Sunday night. That way I will have time to grade all of this before it's due at the beginning of next week. If you have any questions, please email me. I put up all the details about the term paper for you, and I really appreciate going through this journey with all of you. Take care, and God bless.